there's no public consciousness about what is going on at Guantanamo. And I truly believe that that is a factor of the racism that underpins Guantanamo.
No one can act with impunity.
These are crimes that are beyond the pale.
We are talking about human beings. We're not talking about numbers.
We need a court. That's as simple as that.
This is Asymmetrical Haircuts, your international justice podcast with Janet Anderson and Stephanie van den Berg.
All rise.
Hi everyone, just a quick heads up before we get into the podcast. We recorded this at the end of October last year because we were thinking about all the issues related to international law that would face the next US president, but we didn't even know who that would be. Since then, there's a lot that has happened also at Guantanamo, and can you believe that it's already 23 years since it opened? If you listen through to the end, we'll provide an update on the latest news related to Guantanamo.
Hi, Steph.
Hi, Janet.
So all through the years, I've been working on international criminal justice. There's this big G word. No, I'm not talking only about genocide. I'm talking about Guantanamo.
Yeah, we've seen the films, we've seen the documentaries. I was in a plane from Serbia in the summer and sat next to somebody with a free everybody in Guantanamo t-shirt, and turned out he was one of the people who was released to Serbia. So I was again piqued my interest that still hasn't closed down, because we really never thought that in 24-25, as the new US president is being elected and inaugurated so many years after Obama promised to close Gitmo down, that it's still here.
Yeah, I made a new friend recently, and he used to work for Amnesty International on Guantanamo. And he started just as Obama was elected in 2008. And friends at the time said to him, "Oh, you're crazy. Why are you taking that job? It'll be gone soon. I mean, Obama's promised, hasn't he? You'll be out of a job." And boy, were they wrong. So to give us the lowdown, give us some context, give us some clarity, we invited international lawyer Alka Pradhan onto the podcast, and we've been wanting to have her for ages. So really pleased you could make the time. Hi, Alka.
Hi, thank you for having me.
You're so welcome. You are representing Ammar al-Baluchi. He's a Pakistani man accused of being an Al-Qaeda money man and charged in connection with the September 11 attacks. He was arrested in 2003 and he faces the death penalty if he's convicted. So how did you get involved? Can you meet your client? Do you get a letter from him? Would you please represent me? How does it work?
So it's a bit circuitous, but essentially I started, there are two sides of Gitmo. There's the habeas side, where we're trying to get people cleared and released. And there's the military commission side. I started on the habeas side, working with Reprieve, which is the UK-based NGO that's represented a lot of people at Guantanamo. And I opened their US office, or helped open their US office here in DC, worked on their habeas petitions for men that they were representing for a long time. And then, everybody who works at Guantanamo gets to know each other. It's a very small community. We're all members of what we call the Guantanamo Bay Bar Association. And so over the course of a couple of years, we did a decent amount of relatively high-profile litigation, and I got a call from the military commission saying, Mr. al-Baluchi's team is looking for a civilian lawyer, and he's seen some of the press around what you've been doing. He's interested in having you. That's how I got involved.
Okay, I mean, I kind of read one of those big profiles of you, and it said he was watching you and watching how you performed.
That's right. I'd done a number of interviews about the, frankly, horrific force-feeding practices at Guantanamo that are still in practice, less used, but still in practice to this day. And he did, when my name was floated, he'd heard of me, and he asked for clips and things like that. So he did watch and say, can you interview her? I'd like to consider her.
So you're not representing him alone. Who else is on the team?
No, very much not. There are roughly 24 people on the team, and that includes 6 lawyers, some military, some civilian, 1 death penalty expert, my colleague James Connell, and linguists, investigators, paralegals, experts on various topics. So it's a big team, and which is appropriate given that it's a death penalty case. So no, very much not alone on this.
And then who pays for this huge team? Is it the Department of Defense? Is it the US government? Do you go around asking for donations to represent him? How does it work?
Yeah, this was the biggest change when I moved from the habeas side to the military commission side, because the habeas side is all, donations or NGOs or sometimes big law firms that are kind of doing it pro bono. The military commissions, because they're run by the Department of Defense, the DoD has to provide the judiciary, the prosecution, and the defense. And so, ironically, I am a DoD employee. I am paid by the Department of Defense to litigate as hard as I can against the Department of Defense, which, I'll be perfectly honest, is the only job in the government I would take now or maybe ever. So it does have its complications, but yes, I get a paycheck from the Department of Defense, and so do most of the people on the team.
Before we ask you some more questions about how it all works, maybe we could take a step back and you just explain military commissions, because, way back, this wasn't what was suggested as a potential solution. What are they and why are they and how are they?
Yeah, absolutely. So for a very long time in the United States and in the world, we have treated terrorism as a domestic criminal issue, right? We treat terrorists as criminals and we try them in domestic courts. September 11th changed a lot of things, and one of the big changes was we wanted a forum, and by we, I mean the US government, not me personally, but the US government at the time wanted a forum in which to try alleged terrorists in connection with September 11th without having to follow, frankly, all the same rules, including evidentiary rules, that are applicable in domestic courts. And that is because there was a decision made post-September 11th about when we capture these people, do we bring them straight to courts in the United States and try them, or do we hold them and try to interrogate them and get more information from them? And that led directly to, CIA black sites, Guantanamo Bay, etc. And the decision was made, no, we're going to hold them and get more information because we think there may be more attacks on the way. For better or worse, that was the decision. And so at a certain point, we decided, actually, we need to prosecute some of these guys, but we're doing things to them that we don't think we necessarily want aired out in domestic courts. And so they set up these military commissions at Guantanamo Bay. There is a history of military tribunals being used in connection with war, as you both know, but the subjects of military tribunals have always been active military members, combatants, or civilians directly participating in hostilities, not terrorists, not alleged terrorists. So this was kind of a very new concept of taking people abroad, holding them somewhere, whether at Guantanamo or somewhere else, for perhaps up to years at a time, torturing them very often, if not always, and then bringing them before this kind of purpose-built court at Guantanamo Bay that, again, ironically, is called the Expeditionary Legal Complex because they thought they'd have very quick convictions for these men and then potentially very quick executions as well.
Is that what they didn't want to have come out in public, is the torture issues?
Yes. Everything about the military commissions is built around torture. It wasn't until 2006 that the current batch of men who are being prosecuted at the military commissions were brought to Guantanamo, and that was after 4 years of really some of the most brutal torture in modern history at the CIA black sites. And they were brought to Guantanamo, and then because they were suddenly more visible there, the Bush administration decided we have to do something with them. We can't have 9/11 suspects at Guantanamo and just hold them. We have to try to prosecute them. And that's where this current iteration of military commissions came about. We have to try them, but we have to build it around the fact that we have already tortured them.
So before we kind of get into what this military commission looks like and doesn't look like, and does it look like the court as we know it, or is it very different? We wanted to ask, how do you get there? Because Guantanamo Bay is not very accessible. We hear the stories from, I think it's Kara Rosenberg, who flies down to cover all the cases. So how does it work for you? How often Are you going down to Gitmo? Are you buying the souvenirs for your family? How does it work? As reporters seem to always do when they go to Gitmo and then make like podcasts about it.
So let me answer that first. Yes, I buy everything. I buy everything at the Guantanamo Bay gift shop. I have the most tasteless collection of Guantanamo Bay themed items in the world. In fact, I have a competition going with several of the journalists over who has the most and the most tasteless Guantanamo Bay stuff, in part because I think there will come a day when there is a museum and I want this stuff in there. So yes, my whole family has t-shirts. My friends have t-shirts. We have mugs. We have Real Housewives of Guantanamo Bay bags. Just
Wow.
The worst, most tasteless items. Disney, Mickey Mouse, Guantanamo Bay, an American original, right? What's more original than Guantanamo Bay? Amazing. It's my 4th of July shirt every year, an American original of Guantanamo Bay with Mickey on it.
Wow.
Incredible stuff. But you're right that it's very hard to get to Guantanamo, even for us. So as military commissions employee, right, as an attorney, they do charter flights for us to go down for the hearings. And so those are weekly flights. They're always on Saturdays. And during the scheduled hearings, we go up and down from Saturday to Saturday generally. There used to be more flights. Until very recently, there was a weekday flight, so you didn't necessarily have to stay the entire week. They've actually just recently canceled that. So it goes up and down, but the answer is absolutely yes. It's very, very difficult. And for us, it's the easiest, right? Because we're DoD employees. We have access to those Saturday flights and we don't necessarily have to justify it because we're going to see our clients or we're going for hearings. We fly directly from Andrews Air Force Base down to Guantanamo, and it's roughly 3.5-hour flight. And if people are coming down for hearings, like the press or the NGOs, they come down with us. It's a really lovely collective flight of trial, judiciary, prosecution, defense, media, and the NGOs at the very back near the bathrooms on the plane. That's the seating chart every time.
And can you paint a picture of what it's like inside the complex? Because I think, again, of the images that we've seen over the years, very scary place and the orange jumpsuits. And obviously we can't see inside the actual court. So, try and tell us what it's like.
Yeah, absolutely. So there are 2 different sort of areas for the prisoners down there. One is the detention zone, and that is where Camps 5 and 6 are located. Camp 5 is now where the so-called high-value detainees are. My client is there. And Camp 6 is where the so-called low-value detainees are. I say so-called because it's a very arbitrary distinction, and that's, I think, a whole different topic for another day. But that's where the men live and are detained. And that is also where some of the old camps, like Camp Delta is there, Camp Iguana is there. That's the detention zone. That's a different part of the base than where the courtroom is, which is called the Expeditionary Legal Complex, which is closer to kind of the commercial area of the base. There's one long road where there is a store and a McDonald's and a restaurant, and sort of a few minutes down that road, you have what we call the ELC, the Expeditionary Legal Complex. The courtroom, there are 2 courtrooms now. They're both there's this, big barbed wire fences, and there's a checkpoint, very recent checkpoint, much like when you go to the UN headquarters and there's sort of this big room, you go through security and all of that. So there's this big checkpoint like that. And there's sort of sniper netting everywhere, so you can't really see into the complex from outside. You go in and you're sort of, if you're a member of the media or the public, you're ushered directly into the courtrooms. You can't go anywhere else in the complex. There's a different checkpoint that's run by badges to get into the legal offices. And then each team has their own kind of metal trailer, really kind of rudimentary metal trailer in which we have, all of our computer stations and seats and things like that. But it's all trailers, essentially. It's all kind of big metal structures. When when you walk into the courtroom, there are pictures of the courtroom available online with nobody in them, of course. You can't take pictures during hearings and you can't take pictures at any other time. There are pictures of the courtroom. When you look at the pictures, it looks very kind of modern and sterile and up to date. And it sort of is. The tech is decent, but, it wasn't meant to last this long. And so for example, when it rains really hard, as it does at Guantanamo, there are hurricanes, there are typhoons, you can't hear anyone speaking. So if you're up at the podium and you're trying to do an oral argument, you're trying to cross-examine a witness, we have to take a break and, just wait for the rain to stop. It's really grotesquely low tech in that way, and kind of not befitting the biggest criminal trial in U.S. history.
And how is your access to your client? Like, do you meet him at his cell? Does he go to your trailer, or do you not get to meet him at all? I don't know how they set this up.
We do get to meet him. We meet him relatively frequently. The access for the guys who are charged is actually better than access for the so-called low-value detainees. That is one of the things that DOD has sort of done properly, although it's hard. We're not allowed to meet him in his cell. We are not allowed generally to go to Camp 5 at all. And so the meeting space, and this is one of the great sort of dark jokes of Guantanamo, attorney-client meetings are held in Camp Echo 2, which is a former CIA black site. It is the black site that the CIA had at Guantanamo, and it is also the black site in which these men were reinterrogated when they got to Guantanamo to get the evidence the government now wants to use to execute them with. So imagine, now almost 20 years, 18 years later, after they were brought to Guantanamo, continuing to have attorney-client meetings in that black site. During hearings, we try as much as we can to hold meetings in the courtroom or in adjacent areas near the courtroom rather than having to go to the black site. But that's the default space for years and years and years. That's where we go and meet with Amar.
And the judges are military judges because it's a military commission?
That's exactly right. The judges are all military judges. They have all had some period of experience as military judges before they're allowed to qualify to be the judge in the 9/11 case. Our current judge, who I think is trying his best to be as fair as possible, but he had just the right amount. He had just completed 2 years of experience when he was drafted onto the 9/11 case. And the issue with military judges is they're not really, they don't have a lot of experience with international law, international humanitarian law, international human rights law on torture, anything like that. They do have some criminal law experience, but the sort of big ICL issues that dominate the case, they do not have a lot of experience on. And so with various judges over time, and this judge, depending on how you count it, is either our 6th or 7th on the case, we've had to sort of try to, and I say this with as much humility as possible, but try to sort of educate them a little bit on this is actually the way things are litigated, and this is the jurisprudence that's out there that you should consider.
You touched already on one of the big subjects on the case that you're working on. Over the years, we hear that some people have been released from Guantanamo, others not. The case that you have, and you also mentioned, hinges on evidence that is, according to the defense, torture tainted and inadmissible. Is that a way to sum it up, or is there other things that you want to say about this case?
No, I guess that's a pretty good way to sum it up. Yeah, look, there have been almost 800 people held at Guantanamo Bay. The vast majority of them were actually released during the Bush administration because Bush himself realized early on that this is not working. This is not any kind of deterrent for terrorism. It is utterly useless. We have most of the wrong guys here anyway. And even if they're the right guys, this is, we're not gaining any credibility by holding them here. So a lot of them were released during the Bush administration. Of the ones that were left, Obama sort of made an effort to get a lot of them out. But what he didn't do, and I will frankly never forgive that administration for not doing, is they never went back and at least tried to educate the American public on here were the mistakes made. We should never have opened this place. We do not have most of the right people here. And who we consider the right people should not be here. They should be in a court, right? And that story was just never told. Quite to the contrary, Obama actually doubled down on some of the Bush administration policies. Force feeding was worse under Obama than it was under Bush. And so you had this kind of crystallization of these categories of people who were sort of considered low-value detainees because they were picked up in Afghanistan, and the high-value detainees who were picked up, elsewhere and then held in CIA black sites and considered high value for that reason alone, because they had secrets from the black sites that needed a top secret classification, not because they were in particular people considered to pose the worst threat. Now, included in that group of high-value detainees is Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and some of the other defendants in the 9/11 case, but also included among those 14 are people who, like Gulid, who has since been cleared for release, the highest, first high-value detainee cleared for release. And there were people on the low-value side who were previously held at CIA black sites and then for whatever reason shunted over to the other side. So there's this real arbitrariness to who can be cleared, who cannot be cleared. You mentioned the people who, are sort of the never release people. There are a couple of those who we think are in that category, one of whom is Abu Zubaydah. Abu Zubaydah was the first detainee held in the CIA black sites. He was the first one disappeared. He was experimented on, all of that, right? I've met Abu Zubaydah. And the U.S. government I believe in 2010, dropped the allegation that he was ever a member of Al-Qaeda, that he had any involvement in the 9/11 attacks, right? There's no allegations against Abu Zubaydah anymore. The only reason he is still at Guantanamo Bay is because of everything he saw and heard and experienced at the black sites. That's why he keeps having periodic review boards to try and get himself cleared, and he keeps being denied for that reason alone. There is simply no other allegation against him. It's grossly illegal. Yeah, and then you have the guys who are, ostensibly being prosecuted, but here we are in pretrial going into the 13th year of pretrial hearings in the 9/11 case because of the torture issue. So the torture really is the center of this whole thing. I guess I would be remiss, and I'll stop talking, but I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the IHL issues as well, right? And we've litigated those and we have no conclusion or no ruling on them. And those are the sort of the personal jurisdiction issues. Was Ammar a combatant? Look, our position is no, and different parties take different positions on this, different defendants, but our position is no. Ammar was a civilian. He was always a civilian. He didn't go to training camps. He wasn't a member of Al-Qaeda. He was always a civilian. You want to try him, you should have brought him to federal court and tried him there. So there's that issue. Then you have the issue that there are multiple charges, death penalty carrying charges, that have never been considered to be war crimes: terrorism, hijacking, conspiracy. We, the United States, specifically rejected conspiracy from inclusion in the Rome Statute. We instead defaulted to joint criminal enterprise because of that requirement of an actus reus, not conspiracy. And so those, we've litigated them, and we're waiting for someone to decide what's going to happen with those charges.
Wow, 13 years. I'm trying to find a way of asking some kind of sensible question out of this, but it's really tough to kind of add all this up together. I see Stephanie putting her finger up. What you take it, Stephanie. I don't know what to ask now.
Well, I think one of the things I want to ask is because you mentioned this kind of who's a combatant, who's not a combatant, and I'm kind of jumping ahead in some of the questions we had, but it really raises for me the issue of what is now the kind of heritage of Guantanamo in current conflicts, because you see that in the Israel-Gaza conflict, you see that Israel is picking up on some of the terminology that was used for Guantanamo, the unlawful combatant, explaining the kind of IHL rules and pointing to this precedent. Again, what is your feeling when you see that, and that kind of using Guantanamo, and the US did it as not a justification, but a reason where it seems to kind of be absorbed into IHL argumentation, at least?
Well, it's exactly what we've been afraid of for 20 years. And there have been points over the past 2 decades when we have said, please, let's end this, because it is Number one, we have no credibility speaking to Russia or speaking to China or speaking to these states that do it on perhaps a more widespread basis, but we don't have the moral standing to be able to say it when these atrocities are continuing to take place at Guantanamo Bay. My client still doesn't have medical care for his torture, he's deteriorating. This is an ongoing violation of the convention. So we don't have the moral standing, but what we were really afraid of is, not necessarily like the so-called rogue states, right? I don't want to call any state a particular rogue state coming from where I come from, like Guantanamo, but the states that are not our allies, who we want to criticize. The fear was somewhat what they would do, but the fear was actually what's happening now, that we would both criticize some states for doing exactly what we're doing and reinforce this bad precedent with allies. And we saw that, this is not, with the Israel-Gaza issue, over time, right? It didn't start on October 7th. We all know that. And the detention of Palestinians and the subjection of Palestinians to military tribunals is something that we have flagged before, as this is not a huge difference, right, between this and the military commissions, except that there are more, right, being subjected to them in those tribunals. But obviously, since October 7th, you've seen the weaponization of this, it's self-defense, it's self-defense, it's self-defense, it's self-defense, ad nauseum, right, unto death, destruction, genocide. And that is really what we've been afraid of for 2 decades. We really plumbed the depths ourselves when we went into Iraq and committed untold atrocities. Many of the stories still have not been accounted for. There's been almost zero accountability for it. So it is really like the realization of some of our worst fears, the normalization of people who aren't subject to any law or protections in a war context, the normalization of a separate court for a specific group of people, which has always been illegal under international law. And that was normalized. The absolute refusal to entertain accountability for torture and other crimes on our end, which was normalized by Obama, of all people. The lack of accountability, which domestically, right, led in many ways to Trump, has led again to Trump's return. In fact, I wrote an op-ed begging the Biden administration, using the example of Guantanamo, begging them to hold Trump officials to account. And while we're at it, let's go back and implement some sort of TRC, right? Or some investigation into these atrocities so that we can finally stop this cycle. Didn't happen. We've seen almost the opposite. And then you get to sort of the application of these flagrant IHL human rights violations to our own allies, right? While we continue to talk about so-called rogue states. It is incredibly dangerous. It's an incredibly dangerous moment, I think, for IHL and the juxtaposition of IHL and human rights law. We hear all the time from State Department officials, DOD officials, quietly, that they get Guantanamo thrown in their face all the time. And there's really only so long we could keep up this double standard before it started to have really widespread, terrible effects outside of our control, which I think is what we're seeing now.
So I want to bring it towards the American election, but let me just say you used an acronym there, TRC, meaning a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, just in case anybody's thinking, what was that? So we're speaking at the end of October, and I don't see Guantanamo being mentioned as an issue at all by either candidate. I mean, why isn't it?
Well, ironically, it was almost became a big campaign issue when several of the defendants decided to conclude plea deals. It almost became an issue. But no, it is, I believe that Guantanamo is one of the most bipartisan issues in the United States to this day. It has been essentially rubber stamped by both parties. No one really cares about the men down there. No one in the United States cares. No one even knows. If you go to, look, I grew up in Ohio. If you go to Ohio, you ask anybody, hey, what about Guantanamo? They're like, is that still open? Number one. Number two, I thought we killed KSM. I thought we executed them, right? No, there's no public consciousness about what is going on at Guantanamo. And I truly believe that that is a factor of the racism that underpins Guantanamo. If there were French or German or Dutch or Norwegian nationals being held at Guantanamo, there is no way the facility would have been kept open for more than 2 decades now. There's just no way. It is because it is these 2 Americans, faceless, nameless, Muslim men, that there is not more outrage about the fact that they're being held there. And the fact that, look, there's been no justice. There's been no process for 9/11, right? You can come at it any way you want, but yeah, there's no mention of it. And I think both parties have sort of, I mean, obviously one party considers it a good thing that it continues to be open. And the Democrats, I think, have basically taken it as a necessary evil. Even the most progressive Democrats are not willing to expend any political capital on Guantanamo because there's this understanding, and I think it is the correct understanding, that the American public does not care. That is a success. That is the success of the Bush administration in making it an issue that Americans do not care about. And that is something that just keeps us very, very angry all the time.
Just briefly, the Stephapedia, the plea deals, what happened is that indeed there was, or it leaked, or it was announced that the prosecution had made a plea deal with several Guantanamo Bay detainees, and that then was kind of fodder for the Republican Party to make an argument that the Democrats are letting all the bad people go and, not being tough on crime. So, as it is now, and having done this work maybe you haven't done the work for 20 years, but looking at the last 20 years, do you see Guantanamo Bay prison, or do you see that, let's say, detention complex ever being closed?
I have there's sort of the answer that I think ICL enthusiasts would like to give, which is, yes, absolutely, we're going to get there. We're going to get it closed. We're going to empty it out. We're going to get these men medical care. I think the real answer is no. I do not see the detention facility ever actually closing. The best we can hope for, and this is what I think we're trying to achieve over several years of negotiations with the prosecution, is let's empty out as many as we can, everyone who can be cleared for release, right? The men who are currently being prosecuted, the best way to get through that is really to resolve the cases. There's never going to be a fair trial anymore. And I'm sorry to say that, but the minute we tortured them, there was never going to be a fair trial for 9/11. It has only gotten worse over the years as evidence has been destroyed and the men have deteriorated, and they're in very poor health now. One has been severed because of his really awful mental health. He's not capable of standing trial. So the best way is to resolve these cases through plea negotiations and through the plea deals, at which point the facility transforms from a place of arbitrary detention to a prison where people are serving their sentences. And if we get there with the appropriate medical care, that would be progress. Ideally, we would have the people who are suffering the most in the worst sort of medical conditions, like Amar, to be perfectly honest, transferred somewhere where they can receive the medical care they need. I do not think this is too much to ask. These are men who were they were tortured to within an inch of their lives. They have continuous PTSD, they have brain damage, all of that. There is no reason why they shouldn't be transferred somewhere that is able and willing to provide them medical care. So that's what we would like to work towards.
Again, a small technical term that you used, severed, meaning that one person's case was separated off from the others. Doesn't mean to say that he was executed or his head was severed. He was, put to one side, and in this case, because he wasn't able to stand trial with the others. At the end of the podcast, Alka, we always ask our asymmetrical haircuts questions, and the first one always is there something that we should have asked you that we didn't, or something that you just wanted to say? I had some questions about some of the absurdities and things, but I felt that you covered so much of it, but maybe there's some way that you would like to explain some of this to people that you haven't managed to say already.
The two things I would say just really quickly, the first is that I don't think people realize how damaged the system is and how damaged the men are, and that's in every way, from like all the way from like the 10,000-foot like moral damage, moral rot at the center of Guantanamo, to literally the buildings are falling apart. The pipes are bursting in the camps, in the courtroom. Like, it is such a drain on, moral ethics, laws, and money, right, to the American public, that there should be more of an outcry about this. The fact that these men are deteriorating, like similar to Alzheimer's patients, you can watch them deteriorate over time. I've been with Amar 9 years. He can no longer read long documents. He can no longer sit under fluorescent lights. Like, it is excruciating to watch. And I think just the human aspect of that in particular, above all else, it feels like shouting into the void, but I think I have to say it, that these men are human beings. They have families they haven't seen in 2 decades. Even death row convicts have the right to see their families. These people don't. So that it is something that eats away at you, really does, when you sit in rooms with them and you see them every day. And the one other thing I should say is, as an employee of the Department of Defense, I have to give a disclaimer, which is that nothing I say ever represents the opinion of the Department of Defense. Lord forbid, Beyonce forbid. And number 2, nothing I say should be taken to confirm or deny information the government considers to be classified. But thank you.
You've said that a lot of times, that last sentence, I can tell. One of our other asymmetrical haircuts questions, because we're all legal geeks and we love our bizarre or funny or important court cases, is, do you have a favorite case, one that maybe inspired you to do this work, one that continues to rile you, one you want to tell most people about?
What a great question. Whew. Yeah. I don't know that I have one. I have a whole bunch and they're all pounding my mind at the moment. But look, I always come back to Nicaragua at the ICJ because it's just the source of everything, right? I always come back to, in particular, as we're litigating torture, I come back to cases like the Alstorter case, right, from post-World War II, where we're talking about how to litigate terrorism, torture, these sort of big issues. And I just find that case so interesting in how they decided, yes, terrorism is this broad concept, but we're going to go in and we're going to charge every constituent act, right? And that's a more thorough way to do that. And I know that seems really esoteric and weird, but in the development of ICL, right, we always value precision. And that's something that we struggle with. Obviously, I practice at the ICC as well. We struggle with that. And the clarity of some of those decisions, and I always go back to the Alstorter case, which was in Poland, I think can still be so instructive for younger lawyers trying to navigate these big kind of broad, where do you start, IHL, ICL issues. So yeah, those would be my 2.
And our final question is there anything that you would like to recommend in terms of listening, maybe podcasts or watching, what's on your Netflix queue, or a book that you're reading? Can be in our field or can be outside of our fields, could be something that you use to get away from this, or something that you think is really important for people to read.
Actually, yes. So my favorite book of all time, which is not unique, is Crime and Punishment, obviously by Dostoevsky. But another book that I picked up very recently, and I'm just going to give you 10 seconds of backstory, which is that in the course of investigating both the litigation of torture evidence and the preservation of torture facilities, because the government's destroyed so much of our evidence in so many of the facilities, I ended up going to South Korea. And South Korea used to have, right, a state-sponsored torture program in particularly the 80s, but even before that. And they have undertaken this massive effort to preserve that history, to learn from it, which I think, look, no country is perfect, but I think that is really laudable. And so I've read just an enormous amount about the South Korean democracy movement. And one of the books I am currently reading is by Hwang Sok-young. And he is one of the, along with Han Kang, one of the really well-known South Korean authors. He began as a novelist and then joined the democratization movement in the 1980s and was present for the Gwangju massacre in 1980, and then published a very, very famous account of that called Gwangju Diary, and has written like a series of books ever since. And one in particular is called The Prisoner. And that is a memoir of his visit to North Korea, for which he was later imprisoned in South Korea. He was subjected to torture. He writes very movingly, both about his experience of torture and about why he felt compelled to do what he did in the name of democracy, in the name of progress. And I read that now. I literally was just reading it last night. And in the midst of like everything burning down around us, or feeling like it's burning down, it actually feels hopeful. Like, as grim as the subject matter is, it feels hopeful that there are always groups of people who are willing to really walk through fire to maintain it or build new structures. So I really highly, highly, highly recommend Hwang Sok-young's book.
Alka, thank you so much for giving us time today. And I know it's only a very narrow, superficial look into Guantanamo, but for me, it helped to illuminate much of the debates of the last couple of decades.
And also thank you for ending us a bit on a note of hope with your book recommendation, because when you hear you explain everything, it's mind-boggling how this was set up, how it still works, and how it's still going on, and we should pay more attention to it. And I was really struck by that when I sat on a plane from Belgrade to Amsterdam next to a guy with a free all Guantanamo prisoners, and I was like, I need to Google this organization after, because like this, I didn't think that t-shirt was, well, I knew it was, there were still some people in Guantanamo, but I was really like, I haven't thought about that for a long time. I really should pay more attention. So thank you.
Hi, this is Janet back again with a news update for you. So we recorded that back at the end of 2024 when Alka and her team were litigating some of the big issues for her client. And since then, you may have noticed a kind of flurry of news out of Guantanamo. First of all, just a check of who's still there. Guantanamo's first ever detainee was released. He was from Tunisia. There's also a controversy over whether an Iraqi detainee may be released. 2 were sent to Malaysia, 1 back to Kenya, and just this week, 11 Yemenis were sent to Oman. Now, there may have been more that we've missed. Our best guess is that there are 15 people still left. If anyone has an up-to-date list, of course, we'll put that into the show notes. Plus, the plea deal that was negotiated with 3 of the defendants for 9/11 might still be standing. That's an ongoing story, and even as we put this pod out, there's stuff going on in the courtroom. So we will try to catch up with those developments, we hope, later in 2025, because as Alka says, Guantanamo is never going to go away.
This was Asymmetrical Haircuts, your international justice podcast, created and presented by Janet Anderson and Stephanie Vandenberg, in partnership with the Hague Humanity Hub. Music is by Autonautics.com. You can find show notes and everything about the podcast on asymmetricalhaircuts.com. This show is available on every major podcast service, so please subscribe, give us a rating, and spread the word.
If you'd like to support this podcast, please check out our Support Us page at asymmetricalhaircuts.com.
Yes, do buy us a coffee on Patreon. That way, you also get to hear our special War Criminals Book Club recordings with our fellow international justice reporter, Molly Quell.
He steadfastly insisted that he was guilty, quote, only of aiding and abetting in the commission of the crimes with which he was charged, that he himself had never committed an overt act. And I think I could have written that sentence basically for every single defense of a suspect I have ever covered in any trial in any court for war crimes, genocide, crimes against humanity.
It's often a bit of a riot.
And sometimes it's a serious discussion about books, and sometimes not, and sometimes films. And we'll pick things that portray the worlds of international courts and war crimes.
And it's only on Patreon.
Come find us there.